Hello everybody and welcome to Arghanion's Puzzlebox. In this video I want to go over getting started with Zbrush and just give you guys a few tips and tricks on how to get it all up and running and how not to be intimidated by what looks to be a very daunting program. The interface is quite unfriendly, and for the first time it can be the difference between giving up on it straight away or really start to use it and actually appreciate the quality of life settings that it has and all these all the power that lies within this platform. A lot of people will never really learn how to properly use it, and then they'll give up before they actually start it. So hopefully my video is going to help you to put together some some different approaches and go through a few different options that will hopefully help you to achieve the results that you want. I'm going to talk about a few things, so I'm going to add in the description below a time skip to different parts of this video, so we can make it a lot easier for you guys to go to the segment that you want to know about. So I hope you guys will enjoy it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you do. So let's begin. So the first thing you'll see when you open ZBrush is basically this interface. You've got your sort of project over here to open. But we're not going to do any of that at the moment. What we want to do is discuss what are the main areas of the interface on ZBrush. So if we're going to close this by pressing this button over here where it says Lightbox, and now in the center we have our viewport or our canvas or our workspace basically. This is where most of the stuff is is happening. On the left side we have the brush where we can select our brushes, where we can select the type of stroke that we want to achieve, alphas, which are basically something that you will paint on top of your mesh, and then we'll use an alpha as a sort of a to add geometry based on that alpha information. We can also import a texture over in here as well, these are more advanced things to use. And then you can also select the material color, and you got a color picker over here, a gradient that you can play with. So that's on the left side of the menu. On the right side we have where our subtools are going to be. So subtools are ZBrush's version of multiple models in the same file in the same workspace. And then all those subtools will have different options, and again you can find them all on the right side. Also on the right side you will find the navigation buttons such as move, zoom, rotate, and you can do that by using a keyboard shortcuts as well. But for a beginner, this is the area where you can come in and quickly navigate through the interface until you get used to your shortcuts. Another part of this interface is also the top side here, where you can modify the brush settings such as the intensity, focal shift, the draw size, so how big or small the brush is going to be. You've got these options for move, scale, rotate, and also you've got all these a plethora of menus over here which all have sort of different purposes and have a lot of options in them. It's quite a lot to actually look at, and generally you will go into those menus when you've already got a bit accustomed to how ZBrush works as a whole. Let's move on to the next segment now, which is going to help us to identify how to import a model to our workspace. The next thing you want to do is you want to import a model. You can do this by basically pressing the Lightbox button over here, and you can double click any of these predefined models that you can find in your ZBrush folder. So if I double click one of these, it will open them so let's just double click this demo head. Project has been changed. No, I don't want to make any changes. So I've double clicked the head, and now it's been loaded here into my viewport. Now holding the left click and moving around, I can basically move the workspace around, which is quite easy. You can see over here on the right side, this indicates where our model basically is facing. You can see the left side, the right side, and so on. Sorry, that was the other way around. Also, as I've said, this is just basically bringing in a project that's already in ZBrush, and this is not a model, this is not an FBX or an OBJ mesh. This is just a project that we've opened using the Lightbox. Now if we press the document menu over here and we say new document, and obviously we don't want to save, then we can now start importing a model in. So we've got two ways of doing this. Well, sorry, we've got more ways, but I'm just going to talk about two main ones. In the newest version of Zbrush, you can press the import button over here. So pressing that basically will open a new a box where you can navigate to wherever you may have a mesh and import it. Now you can see over here, you can open multiple different variations of that. So OBJ, FBX to name the top two basically. Or you can also import FBXs. This is how we used to do it. Is press the Z plugin over here, and you have an option saying FBX export import. So when you press the import button, again, it will take you to the same thing where you can import an FBX, but that will only work for FBX files. But as I said, the easiest way now is just press this import button. But one other thing that we can do is, again, we can open some of these standard primitives. So we can double click this cylinder. Now this cylinder has now been loaded in our tool palette, and we've got this option here where it says drag rectangular. So if I drag, you can see that it's basically bringing that cylinder into the scene, which is great. And if I do it again, you can see it just drags this same cylinder over and over again. And that's because we haven't pressed the letter T or press this button over here which says edit to start actually editing the mesh. So once we do that, if we press edit, now we can sort of move around the workspace, and as you can see, it only affects the last model that we added in. And that's because basically these other ones have been drawn in, so they're like photographs right now in our, they're images frozen in space in our workspace. So I'm just going to click document again and press new document, and then I'm going to double click the cylinder and drag it in there and press edit, and now I can just edit this model. And that's basically how you can import very quickly an item. Now again, you can also export by doing this. So if I press export over here, I can export this cylinder. Let's just put it on the desktop and then just press save, and now that the model has been exported. If we go to new document again, like I've said, and we press the import button, this is a cylinder, so I've just double clicked it and it's now loaded it. Now this cylinder is not going to show up in our workspace until we actually select it from over here. So that's the cylinder that we just imported. Drag it in, press T, and now you can edit it. So that's pretty much the basics of importing. It's quite straightforward and quite easy. When opening Zbrush, like I said for the first time, your document may look something like this. Sorry, let me just try and do it again. Yes, I would still like to resize the document. As you can see, the document is quite small. You can see that the workspace is quite small over there. So what this means basically is that you need to expand your document. So what I like to do is I can go into document and set up a new resolution in here, that, you know, new settings, or I can press new document, and then all of a sudden the document is as big as on my screen as well, which is quite nice. Again, you can set whatever resolution you want to that, as many times as you want, and play with the settings. Now, it's very important to understand that the higher the resolution of the document, the more taxing it's going to be on your resources. But it won't ultimately affect the quality of your mesh in any way. In terms of if you export the mesh, it won't lose its amount of polygons or anything like that. It's just like in a video game where you basically play with the resolution of the game. Nothing in there is actually affected. It just pixelates everything. It just renders at a lower or higher resolution. So that's the basics of setting up a document, the document size. So now that we have our model on our workspace, one of the important things that we may want to do when starting sculpting is to activate symmetry. The reason why I want to talk about symmetry first is because basically it's one of the most important options in Zbrush, because generally you're going to do character creation in it. So in order to activate symmetry, you'll go into the transform menu, and you've got this option over here where it says activate symmetry, shortcut being letter X. So once we activate this, you can see we're going to affect only on the X axis, which then if I go over on the model, you can see now that it's going to, whatever I do on one side with this brush standard that I'm using, whatever I do on one side happens on the other side as well, which is quite an important thing, because you'll import your model, you want to edit, you want to activate symmetry, you want to make your model as quickly as possible by having the same detail on the left and the right side of your model, and then be able to later on deactivate symmetry and fine tune your mesh. So this is quite an important way of achieving fast and nice results by, as I said, whatever you do on the right side happens on the left side as well, or vice versa. Now, depending on your application, the most common thing you want to do first is try and building up shapes as well. It's not, you don't want to go to using high poly meshes. So for example, going into the right side of the menu, pressing the geometry tab, and then just pressing the divide button a couple of times and start basically, sculpting this highly detailed mesh. I mean, in essence, it makes sense, but then you will basically run into a hiccup where you cannot extend the detail you're adding to big shapes, because you're now basically editing smaller and smaller shapes with a bigger high poly count. So the more I'm going to add on top of this, the more the resolution you can see it starts creasing a lot, and it starts creating all these artifacts because I'm running out of polygons to do it. So the Zbrush has a solution called Dynameshing, and that's basically what you want to do. We can find Dynamesh in the geometry option over here. So in the subtool, we make sure that we have our cylinder selected, so it's the only mesh in here. If we want to add more meshes, we can press the append button. So let's say I've just added this cone, and if we press W on the keyboard, we can move it like so. So now we've got a cone and a cylinder. We can press Q on the keyboard again to basically start editing. As you can see, we are now editing our cone, and this is our cylinder, and basically whichever is selected is going to have a highlighted tone. So now that we've got our cylinder selected, we can go down here, open the geometry menu, and we've got this option called Dynamesh. Now, Dynameshing is very important, as I've said. Based on the resolution that you set up in here, you can basically Dynamesh your model to have more or less polygons. So right now, we're sitting at 561 points. Pressing the Dynamesh button right now is going to take it to 73,000. So it's got quite a bit of detail on there. As you can see, it's quite smooth. But I can basically, add as many brush strokes in here as possible. And you can see at some point it starts creasing again. But now, if I hold Control on the keyboard and drag and drop anywhere that's not a mesh, you can see that now it's basically topologize the entire mesh to give us all the geometry budget back into those forms that we just created. So now we can basically go back and add more detail, and we can do this quite a hefty amount of time before we basically run out of that sort of option. But one other thing that we can do, and I regularly use this, if I want to basically make this mesh into, add more elements to it that I can work, so the Dynamesh can work in my favor, so it doesn't run out of resolution eventually as well, what I can do is press W on the keyboard, hold Control, and then drag the arrow upwards, for example, and this will duplicate part of that mesh into a new one. And if you go in the subtool, this hasn't exactly created a new mesh in the subtool. It's still in the same subtool that it was before, but now I've basically got this form as well. So what I can do is, see, I've got this bottom one masked, so whatever, if I go into draw mode again, I can only affect the top one right now, I can't affect the bottom one. But if I hold Control, drag and drop somewhere, it will basically eliminate the mask. And if I go back into my geometry tab, you can see the Dynamesh is still active, meaning if I press Control and drag again, it will Dynamesh again. And a change has happened over here. If I Control Z, you can see that they weren't linked to each other, but once I Dynamesh, they actually get linked in there, so they become part as one. And I can basically do this for as many times as I want. So I just did it again, and then I'm just going to do it again like that. You can see what happens basically as we drag these in. So it looks quite terrible right now because I'm basically just, I've got symmetry active, and this is why it's happening. But once that's over, I go back to draw mode, I can control and drag, and then it all Dynameshes everything yet again. So this is how quickly we can basically create geometry, and this can be done, as I've said, a plethora of times. So don't be afraid of using it. Yeah, let's just move on now. So now that you know how to use Zbrush a little bit, you got a bit of an understanding of the menus. We haven't really gone through all of them. We just gone through a few. Just gave you a bit of a heads up how to use symmetry and what is it for. Now I want to go through a few tips and tricks that will make your workflow a lot easier. You do need to understand there's no video on YouTube that's going to explain everything you need to do in ZBrush and how to do it. You have to discover a lot of these things on your own by actually asking the question, how can I do this? And then trying to find an answer online. I'm trying to provide you with a basis, with a platform to start on, because I know how difficult it is to open this program for the first time. So what we want to do now is we want to start enabling our UI a little bit. So we want to be able to customize our UI a little bit, because it's quite an empty interface, as you can see. I mean, it's got a plethora and a lot of elements in some places, very cluttered, but then there's a lot of spaces where there's nothing in there. So as you can see, I've got this new button over here called Enable Customize. This allows me to basically modify the interface of ZBrush. And in order for us to activate this, you will go into Preferences, and you've got this option here called Config. So when you press that, you've got this button here called Enable Customize. Now if I press that, you'll see that ZBrush has changed a little bit. But if I press it again, which by default it would be off, now if I have it enabled, I can keep Control and Alt press on the keyboard, and I can drag this element to wherever I want on here. So as you can see, I've just dragged two buttons of Enable Customize on my bar over there. So that's actually the first thing that you would want to bring in. You want to bring in Enable Customize on your UI. So you can drag this. You can see that there's a rectangular where you can actually allow you to drop it. If you drop it anywhere else that the rectangular doesn't exist, it will basically delete the button. So in Preferences, we want the Enable Customize. We have a Store Config option as well, which if you press, it will tell you that the master configuration has been saved successfully, and the next time you restart ZBrush, it will basically go to these settings that you just basically saved, right? The next thing that we want to add as an option could be Dynamesh, because Dynamesh is hidden into these menus. Why not just bring Dynamesh out and just put it over here? And maybe for Dynamesh you also want to take its resolution. You may also want to take, I don't know, something like, I don't know, blur level. This is just an example, but it's quite powerful because now you've got Dynamesh on the main screen. You can just press it and start editing it. Some other things that you can bring over there could be brushes, or could, as I said, could be other buttons. Anything in here that you see, you can bring on that interface if you want to. So that's a very, that's a very important thing to know. One of the options as I said, I like to drag is things like Dynamesh. But there's another option which a lot of people don't even know about, even after using ZBrush for quite a long time, is the brush backface mask. So you'll find that in the brush menu over here, you've got auto masking, and that's the button over there, backface masking. So we'll drag that out and we'll put it somewhere around here, and then we'll basically, I'm going to show you what it does. So let's say we switch our brush, we press the brush button over here, and let's select the clay buildup, which is a very popular brush. You've probably heard about it already. Now, if we press space on the keyboard, we can navigate the menu, the viewport like so. Same thing as these options over here. We can change things like the draw size and other such things for the brush, or we can change it from up here. It's not a problem. But we're just going to increase the brush size like so, and now we're going to start doing some clay buildup. And as you can see, this is basically, let's revert. Deactivate symmetry by pressing X on the keyboard. Let's make that brush size a bit smaller, and let's just try and do some edits. I'm just gonna make it even a bit tiny smaller. So as you can see, I've done some clay buildup over there, but it's also affected that side. And if I do it like so here, it's affected that side as well. This is not exactly something that we want. This is where backface mask comes into play. So if I activate backface mask and then I start modifying some geometry over here, as you can see, nothing has happened on the other side, apart from here where my brush has hit the other side as well. So you see, it basically stops the geometry that you're editing on one side. It's based on the camera view, so it stops the geometry from affecting the other side of the mesh as well, which is quite important when you're editing things like thin sheets or something like that. So that's a very good option to know. But bear in mind that if you change the brush to something else, like a chisel, sorry, not a chisel, a blob, the blob doesn't have the backface mask active. So you want to go in there and activate it again in order to get the, as I said, this option available. So yeah, another thing that you can do is basically you will come across things like you want to divide your mesh but you want to maintain hard edges. So let's just actually make a new document for this very quickly. We'll press the new document button, and I want to bring in, let's just go to the light box, and I want to bring in maybe this cube, yeah? So I've just loaded the cube. If we press Control F on the keyboard, we'll be able to, sorry, Shift F on the keyboard, we'll be able to see its polygons. So that's what it is. What I want to do, you can see over here that our geometry has been divided, but this is what it means. This is why I'm showing that number 5 there. So if I take this down, basically we'll take the cube back to its original state, which has got the least amount of polygons. So if we press delete higher, it will just delete the higher resolution, so there's nothing for us to go to. But if we press the divide button again, you can see that we're increasing the resolution, but it's also making all these edges collapse on themselves because it smoothens them out. So what we want to do in this instance, we want to basically crease the edges. And in order to do this, we'll go into, so let's just go to lower resolution. Actually, let's just go back by Control Z, because doing anything to resolution doesn't do anything at that point because we've already smoothed it out. So what we want to do first, we want to go into this menu where it says polygroups, and we've got this option called groups by normal. So if you press that button, you can see that now every face of every side of this cube has now been given a new color, which then means as a polygroup. So if you go into geometry again and you press the button of crease, and you press crease PG, means crease polygroups border. When you press that button, you can see that it's now created an edge around, you know, right across the border on every part of your cube, every face. So now when we go to geometry and we press divide, sorry, oh yeah, the reason why it's not allowing us to divide is because we need to press this button and make polymesh 3D. And now we can actually, you know, edit this. If I press divide, you can see that the geometry retains its very angular faces because we've got a crease over there, so it cannot actually collapse that edge because we have told Zbrush that we don't want to do that. So this is very important. This is also a very important tool to use when you want to use Zremesher. So if we go to, we've got this blob thing here, so we're just going to add some blobby blobs. Like so, and if we want to Zremesh, we can press this button over here and we've got the Zremesh option. If we press Control F, we can see that we've got some borders in there. So if I then go to Zremesh and select keep groups or keep creases, but I'll just try with the keep groups, and we press Zremesh, it will now basically calculate and re-topologize the entire mesh for a different poly count. Generally you want to go lower, not higher. So again, now it's basically accounted for where you had your creases in your polygroups in order to Zremesh properly, so to maintain these edges. If you wouldn't have had a crease or a polygroup, basically Zremesh would have done the same thing. It would have started to mess up with your geometry. But in this way, you maintain it as much as possible. Very useful for hard surface modeling. Now another option in Zbrush is to basically mask. So masking means you keep Control pressed, and then you can see that we've got a mask pen rather than our brush that we just had. So if you mask this area, for example, let's just deactivate that symmetry. If you mask this area, for example, whatever you model around won't affect the masking area. Obviously, this is based on how hard or smooth the mask is applied. So as you can see, it basically doesn't allow me to modify this area here, which is the darkest from the mask. An important thing to use the mask for, to get rid of geometry, unwanted geometry for example, would be to basically, let's say we've masked this entire area here. We then go into we close the geometry tab and we've got this visibility window. If we press hide PT, it will hide anything that's not masked. But we don't want that. We'll press the show PT, so now we can see everything again. Let's just mask again, and then keeping the Control button pressed and clicking anywhere on the workspace will inverse the mask. And now if we say hide PT, then basically we're not seeing that part that we masked, which is fine, which we wanted to mask. So then if we go into geometry and we go to our modify topology, I'm actually going to take this delete hidden out and put it over here. If we press it, delete hidden, now basically the part of the mesh that we've hid has now been deleted. If we Control Z, we basically have it back on. If we want to see that part of the mesh that we masked, we can then Control Shift and drag. If we do this in drag, it will basically switch between the masked area that we hid and this part. But if we Control Shift click, it will bring back what we masked. Right, now let's just actually mask it again. Go to our visibility tab once more, and then, as I said, invert, hide PT, go to geometry, or press delete hidden, and now we basically do not have this part of the mesh anymore. You see, if I do this, nothing happens with Control Shift. But we've got obviously a open space in here. So in the modify topology, there's some options to work with in order to sort of weld points and so on. But what you can also do, if you've got Dynamesh active or activated again, you can see that Dynamesh will basically fix that for you and will close those holes. There's also an option to actually close holes. I believe it is in modify topology. Yeah, so if we Control Z and we press close holes, then that's happened as well. It's basically filled it with geometry, so it doesn't have a big hole in it. So yeah, that's also, as I said, that's also an important thing to do. Another thing that you can also do, actually, is relation to navigating. With Alt and right click, you can basically move the canvas around like so, or the mesh, or whatever you want to call it. If you press Control and click, it will do this. Control and right click will zoom in, zoom out. Alt just moves it around, and to rotate, you just click anywhere and just drag like so, or right click and it will basically rotate the mesh. You can also press space to do these options, or you can use this menu over here. What I found was, if you're struggling with performance, if you use the menu on the right side, it's generally going to perform a lot better than just using the keyboard and mouse or pen in combination to achieve this. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this and it's proven useful. If you put all these things that I've shown you into good use, you'll actually be you're on the way to actually use Zbrush properly. All you need to do now is then play with all these brushes, because there's plenty of them and they all make different things, they all do different things. It's important that you experiment with them and understand what they actually all achieve. You can also look at online tutorials for this, but I would definitely tell you guys to just experiment, because the things you'll find in there, you will be amazed at how many opportunities and how many ideas they can open for you. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you guys in another upcoming tutorial for Let's Get Started with Something. I want to make this into a sort of a short series. So let me know what you guys think, but thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.